The terror bird would kill a modern horse in 10 seconds, and it would not need a second attempt. That sentence sounds like a wrestling promo. It isn't. It's a conclusion drawn from the skull, from the leg bones, from the exact same biomechanical modeling that tells us how fast a great white shark can accelerate and how much force a saltwater crocodile can generate. When you put a Miocene apex predator on paper in numbers and set it next to a 1,000-pound thoroughbred, the fight doesn't just tilt, it ends. And the strangest part of the whole story is that the killer, in this case, was a bird, not a metaphorical bird, not bird-like. An actual bird, 10 feet tall, flightless, with a skull the size of a horse's own head and a beak built like a hatchet made of bone. The animal is called Phorusrhacidae, pronounced Phorusrhacidae, and it's the poster child for a family scientists have named the Phorusrhacidae. Everyone else just calls them terror birds. The nickname isn't marketing, it's descriptive. Picture the grasslands of what is now Argentina, roughly 15 million years ago, the Miocene. South America is still an island continent, cut off from North America because the Isthmus of Panama hasn't formed yet. There are no big cats down there, no wolves, no bears. The mammals that will eventually flood south from Texas and Mexico haven't started walking yet. The continent is a sealed laboratory, and the experiment running inside it is what happens when birds get the top slot on the food chain. If you were standing in that grass at dawn, the first thing you'd notice isn't the heat. It's the openness, nothing to climb, nothing to hide behind for 100 yards in any direction. The wind moves through waist-high stalks and the horizon stays flat all the way out to a low ridge in the distance. You would feel exposed in a way modern life doesn't prepare anyone for, and you would be right to feel it, because somewhere in that grass, something with a head 10 feet off the ground would have already seen you long before you knew it was there. The answer is Phorusrhacidae, and its bigger, meaner cousin, Kelenken, pronounced Kelenken, which stood about 10 feet tall and weighed over 1,000 pounds. Kelenken's skull alone was 28 inches long, longer than the skull of a modern horse. The largest bird skull ever found from any bird, extinct or alive. Hold that in your head for a second. A skull the size of a horse's skull, mounted on a neck built like a jackhammer, sitting on top of legs designed for one thing: running things down. Now put a modern horse in front of it. A thoroughbred stands about 16 hands, which is roughly 5.5 feet at the shoulder, weighs around 1,000 to 1,200 pounds, can hit 40 miles per hour in a sprint, but only for a short burst. In the wild, a horse's entire survival strategy is one word: run. That's it. That's the plan. Everything about a horse's body, from the single-toed hoof to the barrel chest to the long, springy tendons in the legs, is built around outrunning whatever wants to eat it. And for most of the predators a horse has ever met, that plan works. Wolves get outrun. Mountain lions get outrun. Even most big cats can only sustain a chase for a few hundred yards before they blow up and give up. A terror bird would not give up. And this is where the math gets ugly. Biomechanical studies of terror bird leg bones, specifically the tibiotarsus, which is the fused shin bone that all birds have, suggest that the mid-sized species could hit sustained running speeds of around 30 miles per hour. Some estimates for the larger species push higher. The National Audubon Society has published numbers as high as 60 miles per hour for short bursts, though that top figure is on the aggressive end of what paleontologists will defend in a peer-reviewed paper. The conservative, well-supported range is roughly 30 to 45 miles per hour for a sustained pursuit. Do the comparison. A racehorse tops out at 40. A terror bird could match a racehorse for speed and outlast it for stamina. A wild horse in normal ground condition, spooked and fleeing across open pampas, is not hitting Kentucky Derby numbers. It's hitting maybe 25 to 30, which means the terror bird isn't just keeping up, it's closing. And now we get to the part that ends the fight. Look at a terror bird's skull straight on, and the first thing you notice is the beak. It's not the delicate tweezer-like beak of a hawk. It's not a hooked, tearing beak like an eagle's. It's a curved, deep, laterally flattened weapon that ends in a sharp, downward point. Paleontologists have compared its shape to a hatchet, not as a metaphor, as a mechanical description. The beak works the way a hatchet works. You raise it. You swing it downward, driven by the mass of the whole body and the neck, and whatever you hit gets a hole in it. The biomechanical study everyone in the field cites was published in 2010, led by Federico de Grange and Stephen Rowe. They took a mid-sized terror bird called Andalga lornis, pronounced Andalga lornis, which weighed about 90 pounds and stood about 4.5 feet tall, a small terror bird by the standards of the family. They ran a finite element analysis on the skull, which is the same computer modeling engineers use to figure out how much stress a bridge can take before it collapses. The skull was weak side to side. Wobble it laterally and it would break. That's actually the reason nobody thinks terror birds wrestled with their food. They didn't grab prey and thrash it around the way a lion does. They couldn't, but pushed the skull straight down along the vertical axis, and it was incredibly strong. Reinforced, rigid, built like a piling driver. There's an anatomical detail behind that strength that most people miss. In almost every bird alive today, the upper beak has a small hinge where it meets the rest of the skull. It's called cranial kinesis, and it lets a parrot crack a seed or a gull yank a piece of meat without the whole face flexing. Terror birds lost that hinge, fused, solid bone from the tip of the beak to the base of the skull. A parrot has a face that works like a pair of pliers. A terror bird had a face that worked like a nail. That fused architecture is what turned the skull into a weapon. It couldn't twist, it couldn't grip, it couldn't chew. What it could do was survive a downward impact with an animal larger than itself without shattering, which tells you exactly how the animal killed. It ran the prey down, it got in close, and then it delivered a single targeted downward strike with the beak, powered by the entire mass of the neck and the shoulders. A 10-foot Kelenken swinging its skull downward would be delivering a blow with roughly the same kinetic energy as a 2-story roof beam falling on you. Except the roof beam is aimed at your spine, aimed at the base of your skull, aimed at whatever the bird's binocular vision, sitting nearly 10 feet off the ground, has picked out as the softest and most fatal point of impact. That's why we're calling this 10 seconds, because that's roughly how long it would take. The first second is the moment the horse sees it, or more accurately, doesn't see it in time. Terror birds hunted the open grasslands, which is exactly the terrain a horse evolved for. But the terror bird was taller than the horse. Its head sat above the horse's head. It had the height advantage in every direction it wanted to strike from. Seconds 2 through 6 are the sprint. The horse breaks into a full gallop. The terror bird is already moving, legs like pistons, stride length longer than the horse's stride, and no fatigue curve that matters at this distance. It doesn't need to catch the horse in a mile. It needs to catch it in 50 yards. Second 7, the bird is within range. Second 8, the neck rises, the whole animal loads. Second 9, the head comes down. 28 inches of reinforced skull moving at the speed of a swung baseball bat, tipped with a hardened curved point built for exactly this. It hits the horse at the top of the neck, right where the skull meets the spine. And the neck of a horse, for all the muscle around it, is not designed to absorb an impact from above. Nothing about a horse is designed to absorb an impact from above. Horses evolved to face threats that came from the sides and behind. Wolves, big cats, anything that had to leap. Second 10, the horse is on the ground, not necessarily dead, not immediately, but paralyzed. The spinal column has taken damage the horse's body can't come back from. The terror bird now has a live meal that can't stand up, and it has all the time in the world. That is the fight. That is how it ends. We should stop here and address the obvious question, because there's a rival theory in the paleontology literature, and it deserves a fair hearing. Not everyone agrees terror birds were pure carnivores. In 2015, a team of German researchers ran calcium isotope tests on terror bird bones and got a result that looked more like a herbivore's chemical signature than a carnivore's. It sparked a real argument. Were these birds killing horse-sized prey, or were they scavenging, or were they eating fruit and small animals and not much else? The response from the paleontologists who study the anatomy directly, most notably Luis Chiappe at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, is that the skull settles the argument. You don't grow a 28-inch reinforced hatchet on your face to eat berries. The terror bird's skeleton is a predator's skeleton. The disagreement is mostly about how large the prey items were and how often the bird hunted versus scavenged. Almost nobody in the field argues these animals were vegetarians. The other point of caution: terror birds and horses did overlap in South America for a while. Small horse ancestors were down there during parts of the Miocene, and then modern-style horses moved south during the Great American Biotic Interchange, which is when the Isthmus of Panama finally connected the two continents about 3 million years ago. That interchange is also, not coincidentally, when the largest terror birds started disappearing. New predators came south: big cats, dogs, bears. The terror birds had ruled a closed continent for 60 million years, and once the doors opened, the competition arrived faster than they could adapt. But before that happened, before the isthmus, when a terror bird stepped out of the tall grass and a horse ancestor was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. That fight was not close. There's something else worth pausing on. When you look at the family tree of terror birds, you're looking at the closest thing this planet ever produced to the return of the predatory dinosaurs. Not metaphorically, literally. Birds are dinosaurs. They're the direct descendants of the theropods, the two-legged carnivorous line that produced Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor and every other iconic killer of the Mesozoic. When the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, that entire branch of the family got mostly wiped out. Mostly. But not entirely. A few small, feathered survivors made it through the fire, and they became every bird alive today. The terror birds are what happened when one of those survivor lineages in a continent with no mammalian competition got the chance to go big again, to scale back up, to rebuild something that hunted the way theropods used to hunt. If you had stood in the Miocene grasslands of Argentina and watched a Kelenken run down a herd of prey, you would have been watching, in a very real sense, the closest thing to a live dinosaur any human has ever come to seeing. A 10-foot predator on two legs with a scaled-down but recognizable version of the same body plan that terrorized the Cretaceous. The feathers were a little different, the bones were more air-filled, the bite was weaker than a T-Rex's, but the silhouette, the strategy, the presence, that was theropod territory, reclaimed. And now one more layer, because this is the part that I keep coming back to. Modern horses, the ones we ride, the ones in the pastures outside Lexington, Kentucky, and along the fence lines in Wyoming, are the descendants of animals that survived the terror bird era. Some of the small early horses in South America got eaten, others didn't. The horses that made it through and the horses that eventually spread across North America and into the plains were shaped in part by the pressure of avoiding exactly this kind of predator. That's why horses are the way they are. Long-legged, panicky, wired to run at the first crackle in the grass. Every skittish instinct a horse has is a message written into its DNA by ancestors who almost got hit by a hatchet from above. So when you put a modern horse against a terror bird on paper, you're not putting a random animal against a random predator. You're putting a survivor against the thing its ancestors barely survived. And you're asking whether the horse's inherited defenses, refined over millions of years of running away from big cats and wolves, would work against a threat those cats and wolves never posed. The answer is no, because horses evolved for horizontal threats. Terror birds attacked from above. There's one more comparison worth making before we close, because if you're picturing this fight in your head, you probably want the numbers side by side. 1,000-pound horse against 1,000-pound terror bird. Horse top speed, sustained, about 30 miles per hour. Terror bird sustained running speed, about 30 miles per hour, possibly higher. Horse height at the head, standing alert, about 7 feet. Terror bird height at the head, standing alert, about 10 feet. Horse offensive weapons, hooves, which are effective against threats behind or below, not against threats above. Terror bird offensive weapons, a 28-inch reinforced skull tipped with a curved hatchet beak, delivered downward at the speed of a swung bat. Horse defensive strategy, flight. Terror bird, counter to horse defensive strategy, match the flight speed and outlast it. Horse experience with predators of this type, 0. There has not been a predator like this on Earth in 3 million years. The horse doesn't win any of those categories. Not one. And the 10-second window isn't a rhetorical flourish. It's roughly how long it would take a top-tier terror bird to close the initial distance, land the strike, and put a large ungulate on the ground. We stopped seeing terror birds in the fossil record around 2 million years ago. Some scattered evidence suggests a smaller relative may have made it into Florida during the Great Interchange, and there's still a live argument about whether Titanis walleri, pronounced Titanis walleri, a North American terror bird species named from fossils found in the Sunshine State, hunted alongside American mammals for a brief window before disappearing, which means there is a non-zero chance that early humans in the Americas, arriving something like 20,000 years ago, walked into landscapes where the last, smaller descendants of the terror bird line might still have been running down mammals in the grass. It's speculation. The dates don't quite line up in the mainstream consensus, but the fossil record on this is thin, and it's the kind of thin that keeps paleontologists from ever saying never. Whether or not any human ever saw a live terror bird, we can be certain that every horse in every field today is walking around inside a body that was shaped, in part, by the memory of one. And the fact that horses run the way they run, that they spook the way they spook, that they were the animal we chose to build cavalries and plow fields and cross continents with, is because the birds that used to hunt them lost the arms race a couple million years too early to make it to us. If they hadn't, if Kelenken had ridden the wave through the Pleistocene and into the Holocene, if a 10-foot flightless carnivore with a hatchet for a face was still out there in the tall grass of the pampas today, we would not have domesticated the horse. We would have avoided the horse. Because the horse would be moving in a group at high speed all the time, and it would still be losing on average once every couple of days to a bird that we would recognize in our lizard brains as the exact wrong kind of predator to ever get close to. We would have known, without ever being taught, to stay out of the grass. That's the shape of the world that almost was, a world where the top predator on 2 of the 7 continents wasn't a mammal, wasn't a lizard, wasn't anything we grew up learning to fear. It was a bird, a real one, 10 feet tall, hunting in the open, and gone from Earth just barely early enough that we get to look at horses today and call them the fast ones. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.